What happens if you lose, Nick?
Who the hell is Aquaman?
I get Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, I get sausage biscuits. Maybe you guys will see a little footage of that later on because we got some good stuff.
Throw up the deuces. There you go, baby.
Hey, boys and girls, good afternoon. Welcome to Cage Side with Christopher James. I am Christopher James. Nice to see you. A mouse. Oh my God, a mouse. Anyway, guys, I'm just sharing this out to some groups. Give me just a second here to get things rolling. Welcome to the show. If you're tuning in on the Fight Bananas YouTube page, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you comment on this. I will be talking with Erik Magraken. He's a combat sports attorney. He'll be coming on at 5 o'clock. He is going to give us some deep dive into the UFC lawsuit. Tell us what we're really looking at here, because it's so confusing, the language they use as attorneys. Obviously, I'm not an attorney. I could play one on TV, though. But, you know, we just roll through with it and do what we have to do. So, but he's going to be jumping in, like I said, with us, and we're going to have an excellent show, or should I say an excellent show with him. Then later on tonight, I'll be back at 7 o'clock with James Smiley. He was a coach on Tough 32, the recent season that we're watching now, under the Valentina Shevchenko's team. He's done a really good job. We're going to talk to him about his experience on that and his gym and his training facility that he does, Smiley Academy. So that's awesome. So I just shared this out to a bunch of groups. Let me do this. There we go. Now, while we're waiting, though, I was on my Facebook page today. I posted up some stuff in the a lot of it concerning the flyweight division. And what I was talking about was, first of all, Nate Maness posted today that he is not going to be re-signed by the UFC. They said that he was not exciting enough. Let me pull this up here for you right now. Dun, 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 dun. I just want to make sure I quote it exactly. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, he tweeted out and posted on his Facebook, "We've received word back from the UFC matchmaker last week about why we weren't re-signed. We were told the flyweight division is comprised of exciting fighters, and he doesn't view me as exciting. I suppose half your fights being finishes and bonuses isn't good enough now." I'm really baffled by that. I also posted because they released Muhammad Mokaev, because he's a problem child, apparently. And I had also posted that they had released Manel Cape. However, I'm going to retract that because the information I got seems to have been false. So Manel Cape is still in the octagon. He's 4-3 in the octagon with 8 cancellations, and Nate Maness is not in the octagon. Fights everybody. He's fought across 3 weight divisions for them when they needed somebody to fight. 2-fight winning streak, 3 fight night bonuses. I'm just baffled beyond belief that he is not there. So are they trying to, though, you know, it still leads me to the question, are they trying to clean up the division, refresh the division? Are they trying to, like they did a few years back, maybe delete the division altogether in the flyweights? You know, I mean, Dana White's willing to give away a guy that's 12-0, 7-0 inside the octagon, and said, you know, the PFL is going to pick up a nice undefeated fighter. It doesn't make sense to me. You know, they've dealt with Nate Diaz all those years, and yeah, Nate Diaz became a star for them, but Nate Diaz is a problem child, a diva to the fullest capacity. So I don't know what the criteria is that they're looking for and what causes them to, or what constitutes them saying that this one particular guy is a problem child and we have to cut him and let him go. It doesn't make sense to me. So Oh, what's up there? Shout out to Ray Roberts. Where is it? There it is. The attorney is the member of the Association of Boxing Commissions. Yes, he is a non-voting member, but he is on the board of the Association of Boxing Commissions. Ray, John, and this is Ray, and this is John. They're from Boxing Bananas. Glad to see that they're jumping on board today. My guy, have a great show like always, brother. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Boxing Bananas will be on. I think they're going to be doing a preview of the fight. Terrence Crawford's fighting this weekend, and I think they'll be doing a preview show of that card on Thursday. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But and for you guys, Ray and John, Terrence Bud Crawford appeared on Friday Night SmackDown last week. Punched a wrestler in the face, a guy named Austin Theory. I know you guys don't follow the wrestling like I do or like Dave Van Auken does, but they did a little gimmick and he popped him in the face. It was a nice fucking right hand from the fucking waist. He was just sitting there like, just fucking floored him. Austin Theory sold it really well. Obviously, I don't think he really smashed him because Austin Theory would still be sleeping inside the WWE ring if he did. Excuse me, guys. Sorry about that. Let me take a little swig of my Mountain Dew right here. Oh, my sister-in-law, Pamela Elliott, throwing up the. What's up, Michelle? And then this guy, Ahmad. How do I block this guy? Block user. All right, there we go. Block user. Cool. Yeah, when you come on my show and you say, fuck you, old ass, you get blocked. And now he's blocked. There we go. And I'm not that old, buddy. Woo, that was a good one right there. But anyway, so back to this featherweight or flyweight division conversation. Is the UFC trying to get rid of the flyweights? I just don't understand some of the moves they're making right now. And, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So I'm not going to really delve too deeply into it because I'd be talking out of my ass, and I don't want to talk out of my ass. Also today, a couple of fight announcements I want to drop with you. Let me see. First one, Christopher Curtis versus Kevin Trailblazer Holland. The Action Man versus the Trailblazer. Salt Lake City, UFC 307, October 5th. It's official. I'm going with Christopher Curtis on this one. He's been chomping to get back in from injury and recovery. I just think he's going to take the fight more seriously than Holland. Holland is so chill and laid back, and I know he's a serious fighter and he fights well, but there's just something about Chris Curtis that I really, really enjoy watching. And then also in the light heavyweight, and that's going to be a middleweight fight. So let me just clear that up. And then in the light heavyweight division, this was a fight, and I said it on my post. This fight was not on my bingo card for 2024, but man, I really like it. Ovens St. Preux versus Ryan Spahn, September 7th in Las Vegas for a fight night. I don't know where they're going to sit on the card, but they are going to be on the card. We also had announcements about over the weekend about UFC 306, which is UFC Noche Riyadh season. So how funny is this? It's UFC Noche, which is supposed to be a tribute to Mexican fighters. It's brought to you by Riyadh season, which is Saudi Arabia, and it features a main event between Merab Dvalishvili, who's Georgian, and Sean O'Malley, who's from Arizona. The co-main is Mexican fighter Alexa Grasso defends her title against Valentina Shevchenko for the third time. So that's going to be exciting. But how crazy is it that it's a Mexican Independence Night, fight night, and it's being, sponsored by the Saudi Arabians in Riyadh with Riyadh season, and the Mexicans aren't headlining the card. There's a few Mexicans on the card, but they're not headlining. It's just funny. It's just funny. And then that night they're going head to head with Canelo at the in Vegas also. So it just, it's just a crazy set of circumstances. I'm kind of laughing about all day long, because I didn't think about the Canelo card till earlier today, and I was like, man, they're doing the Canelo card the same night about a mile down the road from the Sphere. And UFC is going to go head to head. Both events will sell out. I'm not even worried about it. And if I'm being honest, I don't think they're going to hurt each other pay-per-view wise. The UFC and the boxing fans, they're just different. There are some crossover fans, but the UFC fan is the UFC fan, MMA fan, if you will. And the boxing world fans are the boxing world fans. So they're going to tune into what they want to watch. So they're getting a lot of combat sports at night, and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to try to watch both because I'm interested in both. I don't know how well I'll be able to pull that off, but I'll give it my best shot. Let's see, what else did I want to jump in today before I bring in my first guest? I think that's it. He's in the green room a couple minutes early, so we're going to bring him in now for you. He is a combat sports attorney. He is part of the ABC Association of Boxing Commissions. He is a non-voting member. And I got to tell you, I follow a bunch of different people on Twitter, or X, if you will. And I've been trying to keep up with the UFC lawsuit. And you get a lot of garbage out there. There's just a lot of garbage out there, a lot of misinformation. But I started following my first guest a while back, too, before the lawsuit thing was really popping. He's always been on my Twitter feed because he's just knowledgeable in combat sports. But then I started paying attention a lot more to the posts he was making about the UFC antitrust lawsuit. And it just makes sense for me. Like, he speaks to me like I'm a 6-year-old, I guess, because that's how I need to explain sometimes. If I'm being honest with you, when it comes to legalese, I am not an expert, but he is. So I'm honored to have him on. I'm glad he was able to take time out of his day from watching the Olympics and all that good stuff. But we're going to bring him in right now. His name is Erik Magraken, and here we go. Erik, man, how are you today?
Hey, Chris, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for being on with us right now. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to have you on because there's so many questions about the lawsuit, and we'll get into that in just a second. But before we get into that, the hottest topic was the new amended rules to the mixed martial arts unified rules, with the 12-6 elbows, which was long overdue in my opinion, and the downed opponent definition. So since you are a member of the ABC, maybe you can give us a little deeper dive into that and how they finally came to what I consider the right decisions for both rules.
Yeah, I think they're positive changes. I just put a quick poll out on Twitter just to get the general feedback, and I think only 3% of people that voted on that poll didn't like the changes. So they were, I know it's not scientific, but in terms of the people I've interacted with, very positively received by the MMA community. So the downed fighter rule's been a bit of a mess over the years because, on the one hand, states are very inconsistent about it, but secondly, the way the old rule was written is you needed one hand down being weight bearing, and that'd be considered grounded, or if anything else is down, and you just get this weird level of inconsistency where, is the guy grounded or not? Like, is the guy weight bearing or not? And fighters need to pay attention to that nuance, and referees have to pay attention to that nuance as well. This new rule made it a whole lot simpler. It basically just says something other than your hands or your feet have to be in touch with the canvas to be grounded. So a forearm, an elbow, a knee, you're on your butt, anything like that, you're grounded. But even if you're weight bearing on one hand or both hands, you're no longer grounded. So it's a good rule. I think all the major commissions are on board, and they're going to be amending their internal rules quickly to make this happen. These changes come into effect in the unified rules on November 1st. So there's a bit of a pause, a bit of a grace period, just so commissions could do the work they need to do to make it legal in their jurisdiction. And, just as importantly, to give fighters time to adapt to these new rules, to start training for these new rules, and to get officials up to speed on these as well. So that's It's a good step. If you think about this change, you've got quite a few things that are going to be different. So if somebody's posted on both hands, you could now soccer kick to the head. You could now knee to the head. And here's what not everybody thinks about, but you could now stomp the hands as well, because you can't stomp a downed fighter. And under the old rule, if the hand wasn't weight bearing, they're not down, but you can't really stomp a hand that's not weight bearing. But now if somebody's placing weight on their hands, you could stomp that as well. So coaches need to start thinking about this and training their fighters accordingly. And the second rule was really a no-brainer. It was that 12-6 elbow, that straight up and down elbow. It's been a foul for many, many years. It's got a bit of a silly history in terms of how it became a foul in the first place. And I think what really changed things is there was a study from a kinesiology school a few years ago, and they basically took a bunch of MMA athletes and they took sensors that are going to measure the impact. And they said, okay, strike it as hard as you can with conventional legal elbows from standing and from grounded positions, like in guard and mount and side control. And from that same position, now let's do that 12-6 elbow. And what they found is there's no more force generated in the 12-6. In fact, for most positions, the already legal elbow strikes are generating a lot more force. So it's sort of a silly rule. And the other thing that happened is it got read down to almost being a nonsensical foul, because any level of arc or slant would make it a legal elbow, right? So you could go, okay, 12-6 is illegal, but you could go 1-7, and now that's legal. Or if you put a little bit of arc into it, it's not going to be a 12-6 elbow. So it was basically reduced into meaninglessness. So it was long past time to get rid of it, and I'm glad the committee proposed it, and I'm more glad that all of the states and tribal commissions got together and voted to approve it.
Yeah, now we just got the thing you just said at the end of that whole phrase is the commissions in each state getting together to approve it, and then carry it to their jurisdiction. Because what we've seen over the many years that we've dealt with this, especially in the grounded fighter, there's some states you had to have two hands down. There's some states you only had to have one hand down. And it's confusing to the fighters, coaches, but the most important person that's confusing to has been the referees, traveling from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And, they do the best, it's a tough job, but they do their best to keep up the rules. But sometimes they're human and they make a mistake on, what's grounded, what's not. And it's bad for a fighter because, their payday depends on, the referee getting it right. So I'm praying to God. I know I live in Florida, so I'm sure Florida's going to adopt the new rule. They're a pretty proactive commission here. I've worked with them for a long time. But some states are not going to. New Jersey is one of those states that always screws with me. Like they want to just do their own thing, and so I don't know if it's going to be approved in New Jersey. I guess we're just going to have to wait till November 1st to find out. And I love the picture. I shared your picture on your post where you had the diagram of the human body with all the veins and everything, and it looks like a bear standing up. It looks like a bear. A couple of people commented on it, goes, "Oh, cool, we're going to get the bear." But I was trying to explain to them in the post that this is just to give you an idea of both hands on the ground, both feet on the ground. That is not grounded. You have to have a body part, an elbow, a knee, something else other than your hands or feet. And like I said, it's been a long time coming, and I'm really glad. And the 12-6 elbow rule, the most famous case of that is John Jones. I know Dana White has been working tirelessly behind the scenes for years to get that fight overturned. Just quickly, what do you think the odds are on that getting overturned and John getting the 0 back on his record?
I can't imagine he succeeds in doing that because, one, the rule change isn't retroactive. And two, Nevada has very limited appeal rights for fighters. Like I just can't see how you could slot that appeal into the limited ways fighters could overturn a bout result in Nevada. And three, it's been so many years, there's going to be some limitation issues in play. I just don't see it happening, but who the hell knows in this crazy sport? I mean, wild things do happen, but I just can't see how legally he could pull it off. Maybe he gets together with Hamill and says, "Hey, let me give you a few bucks and you consent to this becoming a win in my favor." I mean, who knows how they could wheel and deal, but I don't think so. I think he's stuck with that loss, whether it was right or wrong.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to overturn it either. I'm a huge John Jones fan, have been, before he even made it to the UFC. But I agree with you. I don't think they're going to overturn either. I just think, like you said, it's not a rule that's retroactive. So there's no basis for them to overturn it. You know, if they said that this rule is retroactive to 2001, well, then, yeah, John Jones would be fine. They'd overturn it. He'd have the O. But most people still consider him undefeated regardless of that one loss on his record because they know it was a crappy night. And Steve Mazzagatti, the famous great referee, he was the one who made the call. So we'll just move on from that. I got a question for you from one of our my cohort. How should I say cohorts? He does a show on our Fight Bananas network called Boxing Bananas. So this is a boxing question, and it says, ask Erik about the letterhead of ABC sent WBA 3 years ago, threatening to not honor the WBA belt as sanctioned within a USA jurisdiction due to having multiple WBA world titles in the same division, regular title and super duper title. Since they are unified, since then they unified a few, but not all, and still are making man moves.
Yeah, I think I remember that letter being sent. I think Mazzulli sent that letter. I have to tell you, though, I haven't revisited that issue in ages, so I don't have anything specific to say on it other than the observation that the watering down of boxing belts seems to be getting greater and greater. Unification is a dream from years gone by, it seems. So I don't know that the ABC is going to be doubling down on that position. I think these alphabet titles keep largely doing what they want.
Yeah, we could, if I brought Ray or his partner John on the show and we start talking about the alphabet, belt groups, you guys could probably talk for 35, 40 hours and they would just have nonstop for you. It's crazy. It's just crazy. All right. So now for the meat and the potatoes, now that I can actually see again, my glasses were a little smudged up there. The UFC antitrust lawsuit, it's been going on for so freaking long. And they finally came to a settlement. For you guys that are new to this, group of fighters got together and filed a class action lawsuit against the UFC about fighter pay and contract conditions and all kinds of other stuff. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but that's the basics of what it was about. Well, a little while back, I believe it was in March, they settled with the two groups the plaintiffs and the UFC settled on a $335 million lawsuit settlement. But the Judge Boulware, has to approve the settlement, and it was supposed to be approved, I think July 12th was the last update I remember off the top of my head, without pulling up information. And he still has not certified approved, I should say, approved the settlement between these two parties. Now, when this news broke that the settlement came out, $335 million, and there was no other attachments to it, I didn't hear anything about adjustments on contracts or anything. It just came down to what looked like just money. And that wasn't just the basis of the lawsuit. So $335 million, I want to say, if I remember correctly, the lawsuit originally was intending somewhere between $800 million and $1.4 billion or some number like that they were going to go after to get to these fighters. But $335 million seems low in my book. And I guess Judge Boulware must feel the same way. So I brought Erik in today because he's the guy that I see with the most correct information about the lawsuit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erik and let him just kind of break it down for you. And I'm just going to sit here, shut my mouth, and learn some stuff just like you guys. Take it away, Erik, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no, happy to chat, and maybe you could direct me with a few questions. But
sure, I will.
I'll just start on this latest development. So there's actually two class action lawsuits or two antitrust lawsuits. The first is Lee versus Zuffa, and that covers 2010 to 2017.
Okay.
Now that lawsuit's very mature. That lawsuit was certified, and it was basically a couple of weeks away from trial before this proposed settlement was announced. The second lawsuit is in its infancy. It's Cajun Johnson versus Zuffa, and it's basically covering 2017 all the way to the present day. That lawsuit, basically, it was paused, and it looks like it's going to get restarted if this settlement doesn't get approved by the court. And basically the parties got together and they combined these lawsuits and said, let's assume we can get Johnson certified, and let's settle everything for the 335 million, and let's settle everything for a few contractual changes. Now, I don't want to make light of the contractual changes because they do benefit the fighters, but they're not earth-shattering contractual changes. And because these are class action lawsuits, the parties can't just settle. The parties then have to go to court and get the judge's permission to settle. And, because I've heard some people accusing the judge of sort of being an activist judge or somehow meddling by not approving it. But that's not fair, because judges have a statutory duty. They have no choice. They have to oversee the settlement, and they have to make sure it's a fair settlement. They want to make sure that the non-parties, the non-named parties, the ones that are sucked into the lawsuit by default, are going to be treated fairly by it. And the judge expressed really a whole bunch of criticism. And, if I'm going to boil it down to a couple simple points, it's that the fighters aren't getting enough money in the settlement, and that the fighters aren't getting enough contractual changes. Now, the judge actually didn't even make a ruling. The judge, it was a hearing for the preliminary approval of the settlement, and reporters in the courtroom, I wasn't in there, so I'm relying on what people reported occurring, but the judge apparently expressed some real reservations about the settlement, and basically said, you're going to get my decision within a week. But it's now been a couple of weeks and the judge still hasn't given the decision, so everybody's waiting. And so I guess you never know, maybe the judge had a lot of harsh words, but he's still going to approve the settlement. But the people in the courtroom were saying it doesn't look like this is going to get approved, which then punts it back to the parties, and they either got to get a new deal on the table with more money and more contractual changes to satisfy the judge, or else they just proceed to trial. So that's where things are at.
So now you said if the judge doesn't approve this, will he give the parties the option to go back to the table, or does he just send it to trial? How does that work?
They could always settle. So if the judge, if the judge says this isn't good enough and here's why it's not good enough, then the parties know what the judge is looking for. Like the judge won't come back and say it needs to be so much money, but the judge will put in writing what the real concerns are. And then the parties could sort of read between the lines of, okay, we better get a better deal done if we want to avoid trial. And then the question is, how much appetite does the UFC have to put more money on the table? Or are they just happy to roll the dice? Like, is there a better deal to be had? The judge can't force them to make a better deal. The judge could just reject this and say, off to trial you go. But the parties can always circle back with better numbers to try to impress the court.
Okay. Yeah, because, like I said, I mean, and I'm just speaking from being involved in the sport for as long as I have, working as a ring announcer, covering it, doing media. The $335 million settlement, which I was really surprised that the plaintiffs agreed to, just seems too low for the amount of fighters it has to cover, the amount of money that they were looking for, and again, the contractual changes that are non-existent in this settlement, because while those fighters won't be affected by contractual changes, from 2010 to 2017, it's not just about them. It's about the fighter being protected moving forward, and nothing's going to change. So I think the UFC was happier than a pig in poop, if you will, when this settlement got approved. $335 million, no changes to our contracts. Yeah, we can do that. And they jumped right on it right away. What's your take on the amount of money offered from your point of view, based on what was originally expected? And, if this case gets settled, who won?
Yeah, so if it settles for these numbers, right? If this proposed settlement is approved, I think the UFC is doing very well for themselves, and the market read it that way. Like the moment it was announced, this is going back a few months, TKO stock went shooting up there, and it's been doing handsomely ever since. I think the market read this as a very good settlement for the UFC, because it basically locks them in their current position of power, and it really eliminates any threats of that being unsettled in the near future. Because what you've got all these fighters from 2010 until right now not being able to sue them for antitrust violations, and future fighters have basically been neutered from the ability to do so because their current contracts have class action waivers. So you can't participate in a class action. If you want to sue them, you have to sue them directly. And the contracts also say you can't even sue them in court. You have to go to private arbitration, which has all sorts of expensive upfront fees. Like it's more expensive to go to arbitration than court in terms of the types of fees you have to pay upfront. And so what that does practically is it takes away any lawyer's willingness to do this on contingency. Like a lawyer's going to say, okay, we could maybe go after these guys for hundreds of millions in court, but now the lawyers are saying we can't do that. It's one guy is going to sue them in private arbitration, and we can't lump a whole bunch of cases together. So I don't want to do this on contingency. So, hey, you fighter, you're going to be paying me millions of dollars in legal fees to take this very complicated case through to arbitration. And so what the UFC has done is basically insulated themselves in this position of power. And by the way, I think that is what's underlying the judge's real concerns for not approving the settlement. I think Judge Boulware is sitting there persuaded of the fighters' arguments that the UFC is an unlawful monopsony. That is, that they have this basically this monopoly power over the sport, and they're maintaining it by these very heavy-handed business practices. And the judge is basically thinking, if I approve this, whether it's this much or 100 million more or whatever, I'm just locking these guys into that position of power, and now nobody's going to be able to challenge it. So if they're really using unlawful means, antitrust violating means by having this position of power, this lawsuit has to shake things up. And I want to see a settlement that's going to shake things up. So I think, I think that's what's going through the judge's head. I'm actually looking forward to his formal written reasons because I want to see him articulate exactly what his concerns are.
Yeah, I really want to see what he has to say because, and you brought up the
Just say monopoly. It's good enough. We know what you're saying.
Monopoly. Yes, that word just hits me in the face. I was telling somebody the other word, misopony.
Monopsony.
Monopsony. I was telling the guys from the boxing show about it, and they were going, "No, it's monopoly." I said, "No." I said, "There's a little bit different. Monopsony and monopoly are two different things." I said, "I'll try to break that down on the show," and they were laughing at me because I didn't pronounce it right then either. I'm a professional ring announcer. I should get words right, all the time. But every once in a while, one sticks on my tongue and I just can't shake it. And that's one of them. And I'm glad no fighter has that last name because I'd be screwing it up every single time.
It's a weird one, but here I'll just explain that word for your audience. I'll say two things actually. So monopsony is just basically a monopoly. And so monopoly is I'm selling things to you, the public, but I'm the only dude doing it. I've got this market lined up, and so I could make the price whatever I want. Monopsony is just the other side of the coin. I'm buying services, and I'm the only one buying these services. In this case, we're buying elite fighter services. And so they've got that market locked up. That's what the lawsuit's alleging. The second thing I want to say, because probably the thought just went through half your listeners' mind of, wait a minute, they're not a monopoly. There's one championship, there's PFL, there's all sorts of regional promoters. They're not the only guys doing this. So a legal monopoly is different than the board game monopoly where you win by owning everything or you're the only one doing it. It's really just about market share. It means you've got so much market share that you could unilaterally set the prices. And so the question is that what the UFC is doing? Are they basically unilaterally deciding how much fighter services are worth when it comes to getting funneled into their organization and fighting for the belt? And there's a good argument that they are because they're feeding everybody in through Dana White's Contender Series, TUF. You get these lockstep contracts. There's no negotiation on those numbers. And then they exercise an option and the guys come in and they move up on this lockstep basis. So it's not like there's, you get the odd sort of star coming in from another sport at the entry level, but the average person coming into the UFC, these contracts are all the same. They've got prices controlled. And so that's what's going on. So just in case some listeners are saying, hey, there's other promoters, therefore this lawsuit has to fail because they're not a monopoly, doesn't work that way legally. It's really a market share analysis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I'm glad you broke it down because now I have a better understanding. Because I read a little bit about what it was, but like I said in the intro to you, you break things down and I understand it like you're talking to me like I'm a 6-year-old. And when it comes to legal stuff and legal jargon, that's what I need, because, and most people do too. They don't want to admit that they need it broken down like a 6-year-old, because who wants to admit that? But I'm not ashamed of it, man, because I don't know enough about stuff like that. I didn't go to school for law, so maybe I should have. I could talk a lot, so I probably would have been a good litigator, but you never know. So with the number, and the breakdown. So with this number, if this is the number that they settle on in this lawsuit, I was reading that it's basically the fighters like a Conor McGregor. McGregor is, I guess, part of this lawsuit and he's in that group. He ends up making a lion's share of that money, doesn't he? Is that how it works? The top tier guys are going to make the most money, and it's going to get broken down. So in essence, the guys that were complaining about money are still getting screwed out of money in this settlement. Would that be a fair statement?
I think the mean settlement amount was something like $70,000. So basically half the dudes are getting over 70 grand, half the guys are getting under 70 grand. And I forget what the average was, but it's very top heavy, just like pay in the sport is top heavy. So it was just prorated. How much money did you make? You were ripped off. If your market share demanded this, or your market drawing power demanded this much, but you were underpaid 2, 3, 4 times, those guys are going to get the most because they got harmed the most by the UFC's practices. And by the way, like McGregor's a perfect example. Look at what Mayweather makes boxing by not being locked into these nasty, heavy-handed long-term promoter contracts. Then look at what McGregor makes. He's drawing very similar gates. He's selling very similar pay-per-views. Like he's a top star in his prime, and he was just getting a sliver of what the top boxers were being made. So the headline fighters, the title bout fighters were harmed the most. And those men and women would get the biggest percentage of the settlement. The entry-level fighter, some guy that's on a 10-10 contract that fought 2 or 3 times, then got cut, they're going to make the least under the settlement. It just gets prorated amongst the class. So not everybody gets the same, but that kind of distribution is probably inherently fair, because not every fighter, just because they're in the UFC, is selling pay-per-views or is selling tickets. It's the headliners that push the gate and push the pay-per-views.
Yeah, guys like McGregor and the top tier, So I guess that makes sense. I still feel bad for those guys that are on the lower tier, the tier C, if you will, because they were trying to do this to, maybe hopefully make a little bit of, I don't want to say life-changing money, because I don't think any of them were going to make millions and millions of dollars, but in a sense, a little bit of life-changing money just to kind of get things back on track for themselves. And I just think that this settlement doesn't do them any justice financially. And like I said, the contract with the no contract changes, it doesn't do any fighters any good. You had mentioned that the contracts now have the clause in there where they have to go to arbitration. Is that actually legal to put that into a contract? And I'm guessing it must be, because they're doing it every day. But how is that legal to take away a person or a business's right to go to court?
Yeah, so both those clauses are legal in the United States, saying you cannot participate in a class action. I think the U.S. Supreme Court said, yep, that's fair and square. And hey, you have to go to arbitration. That's certainly fair and square. And those two things combined makes for a pretty UFC-friendly recipe, right? Like it's a very business-friendly recipe when people give up those rights. But here is the really interesting question for me. If those clauses are part of an antitrust scheme, are they still lawful? Like if so I'm running a fair and square business, and you and I are going to enter into a contract, and we agree you're going to arbitrate. Let's not go to court. Let's not air our dirty laundry if we're fighting with each other. Let's do it in private arbitration. That's cool. But what if that's part of the many things I've done to lock up the market unlawfully through antitrust violating behavior? Should it still be upheld? I don't know if there's an answer to that question. Now, I practice in Canada, not the US. I won't pretend, maybe there's a total answer to that question, but I think the judge is grappling with that. I think the judge is wondering, hey, even though these clauses are generally going to be upheld, in this case, because they're part of this insulation of monopsony power, do I want to uphold those? I think the court has to actually go through that exercise. So a lot of fascinating legal questions have to get answered in the Johnson case if it gets back on track and gets certified and moves forward.
Yeah, and from where I'm sitting, based on how long the judge is taking to approve the settlement, I'm really hoping that he doesn't, because I don't think the settlement is fair to the fighters that are on the lawsuit. I don't think it's fair to the fighters in the future or the fighters of today, and more than just financially. I think the UFC fighter is probably the worst paid professional athlete in all the 4 major sports or 5 major sports, based on revenue, because in the NBA, it's 51%. In the NFL, I think it's 49%. I mean, the money goes to the guys on the field. And in the UFC, it just doesn't. Is that something that would change if the Ali Act was enacted in MMA?
Sure, because the UFC could no longer control their titles, right? That's one of the main things. And then the other thing is you can't, it's basically the whole business model of, oh, you want to fight our heavyweight champion, John Jones? Well, you got to sign this long-term deal with us, because if you beat John Jones, we're now your promoter. So we get to keep this title going perpetually, right? You can't do that stuff. You can't have these long-term contracts where you get to own the title forever in boxing. And I know boxing is not a perfect model as well, but
Sure,
the UFC cannot do what they're doing if the Ali Expansion Act was to come in. But I don't see anything indicating the Ali Expansion Act is getting a second wind. I reached out probably a dozen times to Senator Mullen, who was Congressman Mullen back when the Ali Expansion Act was first proposed, and he never even replies. I mean, I don't expect him to, but he never even replies like, oh yeah, I'm on it. He just ignores the question. So I don't know what's happening there. The other thing, you mentioned these unionized pro sports, basketball, hockey, football, whatever, where the
right.
athletes are basically getting 50% of revenues. There's really, fighters might not be able to unionize because they legitimately might be independent contractors. Now, that's its own lengthy conversation we could have, but there's a
Right.
chance they can't even unionize if they want to. And B, if they can unionize, there's nothing showing that they're capable of it. Like, there's nothing showing the internal sort of drive that they want to unionize. And that's not to say that they don't want to. It's just that I think most fighters either don't think about it, or if they do, they don't want to put their neck on the lines and be made an example of, the way the UFC is really good at doing. Like, the UFC is good at getting rid of troublemakers, right? And
They really are.
The career is so short. People don't want to piss off the promoter during that very short career. And so you say, okay, if these guys can't fix, what's the number? Fighters are maybe making 15, 16, 17% of the gross, as opposed to 50% in these unionized sports. Well, if unionization can't fix it, and if the federal legislation's not coming to make it like boxing, what's left? What's left is this antitrust lawsuit. And then if this antitrust lawsuit doesn't really, really shake up the UFC's ability to carry on business as usual, then they're just locked in. They're just locked in for years and years and years. Like you almost want to buy some TKO stock if this thing gets approved, because they're going to be a money-making machine with, a good level of business certainty.
Yeah, it's such a mess for the fighters, and it's sad. When you mentioned about unionization, because I don't see it coming, and it's something that would benefit the sport so well. But the UFC has done a really good job at, when Leslie Smith, started up, trying to really cause a ruckus, and she was still in the promotion. They really shuttled her out as quick as they could. Oh, well, her contract's done. We don't have to re-sign her. Boom. They didn't cut her. They just fought her out, put her in.
Yeah, they paid her. They paid her. I think
They bought her
win
contract
money
out. That's
and said,
right.
you're gone.
Done. See you later.
Yeah.
And,
They just said, that's our last fight. We have no more obligations. See ya. I actually loved what Leslie Smith was doing too, because she took that to the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, and made a complaint, said they retaliated, and she won the first level of that fight, and then it internally got shut down by the higher ups there. But she made some real genuine progress there, but it just didn't get over the finish line through no fault of her own. She was one of the very few really brave fighters willing to publicly take them on while still in the sort of peak of their career. I just want to say one more thing, though, Chris,
Sure.
is, we talk about the upside of the lawsuit and how much more money fighters could get and all these contractual changes they could get. But the other thing I'll note is nothing is guaranteed, right? Like, I don't want to be just one-sided saying the fighters got to crush them at trial. It'd be great for the fighters if they went to trial and got the $1.5 billion that then gets tripled to $4.5 billion. And then, by the way, that doesn't get split amongst everybody. That gets split just amongst the Lee class. And then the Johnson class goes after their own damages and their own contractual changes. That'd be, the fairy tale ending for the fighters. But the other end of the story is maybe you get some jurors in Las Vegas that just say, I don't know what you guys are complaining about. I don't think they're doing anything unfair. I don't get all this fancy economic evidence. You signed the contracts, and I don't know. I just don't think these guys are doing anything that strikes me as unlawful. Case dismissed. Fighters, you walk away with nothing. It's not risk-free. It's not risk-free. And I don't know this for a fact, but I imagine, because a lot of people ask, they say, why would the fighters take so little? They're taking 10 cents on the dollar. I imagine they ran versions of this case in front of mock jurors, and I imagine they didn't like everything that the mock jurors had to say. Like, there is risk that it isn't going to go well. And who knows what that risk is? Like, that's the scary part of making these decisions. Do you take the sure thing that's way less than a good day in court, but it's also way more than a bad day in court? Like, how much appetite do you have to roll the dice in the gambling town of Las Vegas? Like, I just don't know what the right answer is, but I'd love to see the numbers much higher. I'd love to see the contractual changes, something along the lines of 1 year limits on exclusivity, because if the fighters were free agents every year, all of a sudden the PFLs of the world would be bidding on these guys. Imagine if John Jones was a free agent after 1 year. Imagine if, whoever, Sean O'Malley, whoever the big drawing star is a free agent. They might not want to go anywhere, but by having those people bid every year, now the UFC is naturally saying, okay, I'm paying the fighters 20%, I'm paying them 30%. We'll go all the way up to 40 or 50%, because all of a sudden these other wealthy promotions are going to be bidding, or people who never wanted to get into this business because of how rigged it is in the UFC's favor. Now you'll have new people willing to take a stab at the sport, and that would do nothing but benefit the fighters in terms of how much they could negotiate for.
Yeah, and there's so much. We could probably sit here and do a 2 or 3 hour show on this. If we really want to get into deep numbers and all that stuff. You brought up that the plaintiffs on the Lee suit might have put this case in front of a mock jury, and isn't it crazy? I can't imagine sitting on a jury, a mock jury, or the actual jury of this case, and not siding with the fighters. And this isn't coming from my experience in the fight game. This is coming from just a level playing field of fairness and what's right and what's wrong. And how I was raised, I would absolutely side with the plaintiffs in this. So I can't even imagine if a mock jury is like giving bad signals to this case, saying that, hey, well, this, and this. Can you even fathom that? I mean, anybody not siding with the fighters? Is it crazy to you?
Yeah, I could fathom it, just because whenever I talk about it online, and if I say something that sort of goes outside of my Twitter bubble, right? If something gets a little bit viral and all of a sudden it's reaching eyeballs that don't sort of interact with me regularly, there's a whole bunch of people that toe that UFC party line. Like, a lot of people are like, well, if you don't like it, don't sign the contract. Nobody's forcing these guys to fight. The UFC is paying more than PFL is paying these guys. You get those lines, and there's no easy persuasion of people that hold that view. Like, people are hardwired to have certain gut reactions when they have this case presented. And some people might be very pro-business and say, hey, you're a pro athlete, you're getting paid whatever big bucks that you're making while I'm grinding out at some miserable job that I can't stand. And you're living your dream and you sign the contract and I don't like it. Those people do exist, and you get a couple people with those views, especially if they have a strong sense of persuasion to others in that jury room. Who knows how it's going to go for the fighters. But here, I'll tell you the story because it always comes to mind when I talk about it. There was a case in the 80s, USFL versus NFL. It was an antitrust lawsuit, and the USFL basically said, "Hey, NFL, you guys are doing all sorts of dirty stuff with the networks, etc. You're making it so we can't compete against you. We want to sell pro football to the public as well, but you've done some dirty, dirty things, and it's an antitrust violation." And so they went to trial and they won. The jury said, "Yep, NFL, you've done dirty. You've violated the Sherman Act." And then the judge goes to the jury and says, "Okay, award the damages." Do you know what the jury gave the USFL?
$1 or something stupid like that.
$1. $1. And they got tripled. So the NFL wrote a check for $3. Here you go. And it just sort of speaks to the unpredictability, right? Like there, the jury must have been thinking, okay, the NFL's done some dirty stuff, but USFL, you guys just suck. You guys aren't making money because nobody wants to watch your product, right? And again, like it's not a perfect parallel here, but it's just that example that you could win, and then the jury could go completely haywire on you on the economic side of it, right? So the jury could say, okay, the UFC's done all these things they shouldn't have been doing, and that's harmed the fighters. But I don't get what these economists are saying. I don't understand these numbers, and I don't understand why the fighters want that much money, because the UFC is going to be pitching their own numbers, right? Even if we did wrong, it's not 1.5 billion, it's whatever, right? A much smaller number. The jury could go there as well. Like you could win one, but not the other. And so there is risk. Like it would have been a fascinating case to see go to trial. It still might go to trial, but there's just a lot of question marks.
Yeah,
right
it's
now.
crazy. And guys, you're watching Cage Side with Christopher James on Fight Bananas. We're talking with combat sports attorney and member of the Association of Boxing Commissions, Erik Magraken. He's giving us a little breakdown on the UFC antitrust lawsuit, letting me know that there were two actual lawsuits because I forgot that there were two, one covering 2010 to 2017 and one covering 2017 to today. We also broke down the adaptations to the MMA rules concerning 12 to 6 elbows and grounded opponents. If you didn't catch that, just go back and watch from the beginning and keep up with us. Unionization, because that's how these other athletes have gotten these big paydays in their respected sports. Do you really ever see, because we were talking a minute ago about Leslie, and I know I'm jumping backwards a little bit, how Leslie Smith was, she went to the NLRB. She was really trying to get this unionized. There's been a few pushes for unionization over the years. Nobody has really signed on board because, again, I think, like you mentioned, their fear of being, retaliated against by the UFC for trying to unionize against the UFC. But do you ever see a day in your mind that maybe unionization can happen, or do you just think it's never going to happen because this is a sport of individuals, all independent contractors, even though they're treated like employees, they're still independent contractors, that's always crazy. But do you ever think it can happen, or are we just, wasting our time and energy thinking about it?
I think it's unlikely. I never say never. But I think you hit the main point, which is it's such an individual minded sport. And now you have, unlike the old NFL days or NHL days where you got all the guys in the locker room and they're like, hey, let's go for beers afterwards. And you can get the critical mass of the employees to say, we want to be unionized. How do you do that in MMA? You got guys in Dagestan, and you got guys in Russia, and you got guys in Brazil, and you got guys in Japan, and you got guys scattered all over the US, Mexico. How do you get that critical mass together to hit the numbers you need to even start that drive? And that's not even tackling the problem of, are you even an employee? So it just seems super difficult. I actually loved what Leslie Smith's lawyer did. It was a guy named Lucas Middlebrook, and he's involved in unionizing other employees. And so he started something called Project Spearhead. So just super easy. You go online, you click a couple buttons to give your support to this idea. And I think he got some pretty good momentum. But when the UFC sort of had their way and cut Leslie and the NLRB killed it dead in the tracks, it just sort of lost whatever momentum it had. But again, I'll never say never. if I was a betting man, I wouldn't lose my money saying I think they're going to be unionizing anytime soon.
Um, is collective bargaining something that can only happen through unionization, or could they do a collective bargaining kind of agreement outside of being in a union?
No, you can't. You'd get sued for interfering with contractual interests, right? Like it'd be a bunch of guys conspiring to screw over the UFC. But when you're in the process of unionizing, you get some legal protections that you could do that. And so it's it's a very important legal process that you have to go through.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems with unionization, and I guess I have to maybe look at both sides of this. The hard part is, like, and you brought it up. Who are the big ticket sellers? Conor McGregor, versus Nate Maness, who just didn't get re-signed, which I'm horrified at. But he's a flyweight. He's definitely not in Conor McGregor's stratosphere pay wise. But if a unionization happened, then in essence, it's supposed to level the playing field of money for these guys to a degree. In the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, there are guys that make a lot more money than other guys. So there are levels. But I think that's one of the things that the top earning guys will shy away from unionization for, because why should I worry about what Nate makes? If I'm Connor, why should I worry about what Nate Maness makes when I have to worry about taking care of me and my family, what I want? And I think that's one of the hindrances that causes the top tier fighters to not even look at it, because like Conor McGregor doesn't need a fighter union. John Jones don't need a fighter union. Amanda Nunes didn't need a fighter union.
Yeah, but on the other side of that coin, maybe they did need one, and maybe Connor, instead of getting his percentage of the 16% that goes to the fighters, because he ain't taking 16%, he's getting a sliver of 16%, whereas a top boxer's maybe taking home 50-60% of the revenues that are being driven. Maybe you do need that union, right? But I get it. Like the guys that are in their top earning years, they don't want to rock the boat. They got theirs. And what do they care about what the entry-level fighter gets? I completely get that. But again, I think all these other sports figured it out, right? It's not like, okay, you're unionized, now it's communism and everybody gets paid the same. It doesn't work that way. You set minimum standards, right? Like you come into the NHL, I forget the number, but the minimum some dude's going to get paid is $500,000 a year.
Right.
And there's a pension and there's a this and there's a that. And guess what? Then there's free agency after so long. And you're the big goal scorer, or you got 30 team owners bidding on your services, and now you're getting millions and millions and millions per year. You're not getting your $500K or whatever entry-level contract you negotiated. So if it was unionized in the UFC, you'd have entry-level protections, you'd have bumps of minimum pay, and the top guys and women would be getting way more than they're getting right now. That's the reality of the situation. But whether it's through antitrust and the judge forces them to be free agents regularly, whether it's the Ali Act where promoters can't control the titles and can't force opponents to sign long-term deals with them to fight the champion so they control the belt. Whether it is unionization, there's things that could shake things up in the fighters' favor. And I think, again, what's just underlying this whole discussion is if this antitrust lawsuit does get settled, there's a whole bunch of certainty for the UFC's business interests, and there's a lot fewer tools now for fighters hoping to shake things up in the future.
Yeah, and if it does get, if this doesn't get done and gets moved forward, and the UFC has to make some adjustments on, obviously the financial end of it or the contractual end of it, because I don't think they're worried about the money as much as they're worried about protecting their contracts. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, like I bet you if they had to pay, triple what they're paying, they could live with that, right? So we pay $900 million instead of $330 million. We pay $1 billion. We could live with that. You're right. It's our current contracts don't get disrupted. We don't want Sean O'Malley to be a free agent. We don't want all of our champions to be free agents. We don't want the number one contender in each weight division to be a free agent. We want these guys locked up so nobody else could promote these guys for the foreseeable future. I think that's the real threat. The injunctive relief is the real threat. It's hard to put a dollar figure on it. And I think that's Judge Bulwer's main concern is, hey, these guys deserve injunctive relief. Like if you read anything on this, mountains of litigation over the past 10 years, read the certification decision. The judge basically laid it out. Like, here's all the things that they're doing wrong. Here's all the things that he doesn't quite say it, but you could read between the lines. The judge is basically saying, here's all the things that need to change. Otherwise, this antitrust lawsuit doesn't stop future generations from being harmed. I think that's the main thought in the judge's mind.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on that, because I think he's looking at the big picture, and for me that makes me happy, because like I said, the fighters get a bum deal in so many different ways, and I'm glad that maybe this judge is trying to protect not just the fighters from the past, but the fighters for the future. I think that's really good. Hopefully you and I are both right on that, and he's not just going to, put pen to paper and say, all right, it's approved, move on. Because he's been involved with this lawsuit for a while. I mean, this thing's been going on it's got to be a decade, right?
Yeah, I think 10 years this, like November or December, something like that. It's, at least 9 years old right now. Yeah, it's an old case.
It's crazy how lawsuits get dragged down court. Like, I'm in the middle of a lawsuit right now with an insurance company for a car accident from 2020. Here is 2024, and I still haven't gone to court yet. And they just keep finding ways to put it off and put it off. And I'm sure you understand, because you're an attorney. I'm sure you have to deal with that crap every day. As the plaintiff in this case, I'm so frustrated. My attorney's frustrated. My family's frustrated. So I can't even imagine how frustrating it is for you as an attorney to have to go through that. You're just like, oh, son of a bitch, not again. Just let's get these things done, But the court system, I don't know how it is in Canada, but the court system here just sucks.
Yeah. This UFC case has been unusually slow, and you're right. Generally, civil litigation in public court is a bit of a slow process, but this one's been unusually slow. Like there was that 3-year gap where the judge basically said, "Hey, I'm going to certify," and then 3 years passed before he did certify. Like, nothing happened for 3 years, and through no fault of the fighters or the UFC. Like, everybody wanted the thing to get moving one way or the other. So it's been unusually slow. And even now, where a few weeks ago, the judge basically hints he's not going to approve the settlement. And now days are turning into weeks. Soon it's going to be a month. And it's like, hey, are you or are you not approving this case? I'm sure he's got some law clerks doing some heavy legal research to sort of back up whatever he wants to do here, but it's delays frustrating for everybody involved.
It's horrible. Well, listen, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to give us some information that people wanted to hear, and explaining to us in a simple enough term where we can actually grasp it. We don't get overwhelmed with the legal jargon, because legal jargon sometimes is really just so I'm glad you went to school and studied for it, so I didn't have to.
Hey, Chris, my pleasure. Happy to discuss this stuff anytime.
Yeah. Now, I'm guessing you are a fight fan, obviously. There was one other topic I wanted to talk to you about before I jump out, and, maybe 5 minutes on it. You are a huge advocate for brain health. I know I've shared your some of your tweets multiple times about, and I don't remember his name, and I apologize, about the kid who's in the hospital and his GoFundMe. And so I just wanted to know if you could take a few minutes to talk to us about the brain health and the concussion stuff and CTE that you've been really advocating for the safety of the fighters, because there's not enough of that out there.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Chris. So I'm not here to stop anybody from being a fighter if they want to be a fighter. And a lot of people say, Eric, these guys know what they're getting into. Stop with all this advocacy. Stop talking about concussions and CTE. But the reality is, when you talk, and I'm not saying fighters are dumb, but when you talk to a lot of fighters and you ask a follow-up question to, hey, this is dangerous. Yeah, of course it's dangerous. It's obviously dangerous. But you ask a couple follow-up questions about CTE or about concussions, it's just clear that some of the basic knowledge that should be there is absent from the sport. And combat sports are the brain injury business. Like, that's how you win. You brain injure your opponent and your hand is raised and you win. But it's one of the sports that actually has some of the least levels of knowledge about brain health. And that's a problem. So one of the things I'm really trying to fix is I want athletic commissions to give real good information to fighters about CTE and concussions when they get their license. It's just a no-brainer. Like in fact, the Ali Act tells commissions to share health and safety information with fighters, but it's not mandatory. They don't have to do it, and very, very few commissions do it. So that's something I just want to see changed. And again, I'm not trying to stop anybody from fighting or from making dangerous decisions, like live your life the way you want to live. All I'm saying is fighters deserve good information about CTE and concussions, not bro science from whatever guy at the gym is telling them about brain health, because there's a lot of garbage that's believed in the community. And so actually here, I'll just step out of frame for 1 second. So,
yeah, go ahead.
I teamed up with Rose Gracie of the Gracie family and Carla Duran, her father's famous cutman, Stitch Duran.
Yep,
we
Stitch.
We formed a foundation a few years ago, and we got together with the ringside doctors, so all the best men and women that actually go to the fights and look after fighters. And their whole board approved this. So we just put together a really basic concussion poster. We put together a really basic CTE poster. This stuff's available for free if you go to the Association of Ringside Physicians website under fighter resources. If you own a gym, if you train at the gym, just print this up, put them on the wall, read through it, basic information. If you get concussed, don't keep getting hit in the head. If you're in this business, understand the more you're getting your brain rattled in training, the worse your career is going to be. You could only take so much brain shaking. And the brain shaking in the gym isn't paying you $1. It's actually hurting your ability to take more brain shaking when you're being paid for it. And so if fighters could just have access to this information within the industry instead of having to dig for it elsewhere, that'd be a good improvement to the sport. I think that would go a long way to making things better.
Yeah, and this is why I hate power slap.
It just boils it down to the brain injury for the sake of brain injury. Yeah, we could rant about that for an hour as well.
We could. But I'm glad. And if you want to share the information and give us an update on the kid who you've been sharing his GoFundMe, you can do that now too, and give everybody the information if they want to support his GoFundMe. You could drop that here too, because that's really important. And like the first time I saw you post about it, my heart just went, and then I could see you continually update, and I could tell from the posts, just like I could feel the tone from you, how concerned you are for this young man and how much you care. So I definitely wanted to make sure we touched on that before we got off the air, because that's important.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So his name's Zhenwan Li, and very sad case. He was at an amateur level, just a hobbyist level tournament. We'll call it kickboxing for lack of a better word. It wasn't in a ring, just open mat. And he ended up suffering a subdural hematoma, bleeding inside the brain. There was no ambulance on site. It took hours for him to get to hospital. By the time he did, he was at the point of no return. And he's I never want to say never, but his doctors are saying he's probably never going to awaken from this vegetative state. This happened in British Columbia, Canada, but he was here on a student visa. He had to eventually fly back to China. The medical flight alone cost $100,000. I think his family was forced to pay about $30,000 of that bill. You can only imagine the types of care costs that there are. His mom sits by his bedside every day, hoping for further recovery. I'm hoping for further recovery, but the family has real financial needs. We've raised over I'm looking at the number right now, just shy of $38,000 right now has been raised. 736 people have donated. I've gotten all sorts of good people in the sport, Chael Sonnen, Ariel Helwani, all sorts of, Luke Thomas, big names have shared this. They've donated. If you could just take one moment to retweet this link or share it on Instagram or whatever your socials are. And if you could donate a few bucks, anything helps. $5-10, anything helps. I put a goal of $250,000. That sounds like a lot. It's not. It's probably far less than the family's going to need. But if I could hit that goal, it'll buy some immediate peace of mind over the next few years for this young man's mom, and that'll go a long way. So if you can donate a few bucks, if you can share it, appreciate anybody pitching in. So thank you, Chris, for mentioning that.
And when we get off the air, if you go to the broadcast, once it filters through and does all that stuff, definitely go into the comments and put the link in there for the GoFundMe for that as well. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the link from Twitter and then share it as well when I get done with my second episode, which I do at 7:00. I really, we were talking about the concussion stuff in CTE, and, somebody like Heather Hardy just had to retire from boxing, and she was supposed to fight Christine Faria for BKFC World Championship. She had to pull out because of concussion syndrome, is what she called it. And here's a girl, who definitely was finally getting the recognition and the rise and the paydays, that she worked so hard to get. And now she's done. And, she will probably, based on what she was saying on some of her posts, she'll probably be somebody that has CTE, and that still can't be diagnosed till after you're gone. So I hope they could figure out a way to diagnose that prior to dying and maybe figure out a way to stop it. I just don't know how far away we are from that.
Yeah. It seems like progress is being made. I'll just say this, though, because, Heather Hardy was very blunt in her words. And I'm not trying to dunk on her in any way, shape, or form, because she was a very accomplished fighter.
Absolutely.
And she strikes me as a smart woman as well. But it was clear what she was saying is she never understood the real dangers of brain harm in
100%.
What she's doing. Like, obviously, she's not stupid. She understood boxing's dangerous, but she didn't understand the type of brain damage she was being exposed to by that repetitive brain rattling until it was too late. And this is why some better educational resources should be handed down from the commissions to the fighters. And this is also why trainers, coaches, gym owners, put this stuff on your wall. Learn, call me up. If you're involved in this industry and you want to pick my brain about some basics, I'll give you my time for free. Call me up. I'll walk you through what you need to know and steer you towards some resources, because we could all do a little bit better in this industry when it comes to educating fighters and educating trainers.
100%, man. Well, listen, I've kept you for an hour. It was a little longer than I expected to keep you. I'm glad I'm not paying you right now, because legal fees are expensive these days. But thank you so much for taking the time. And just before you go on the fighting side, do you have a favorite MMA fighter? I was just curious.
I don't, just because I'm old. So, if you asked me when I was a kid, 20 or whatever, I'd say sure. But I like the pioneers just because I am old. I like the people that helped develop the sport. And like, I'll enjoy a good personality, or I'll enjoy somebody that's just sort of really achieving their dream. There's lots of moments I enjoy in the sport. But I think there's, I can't say I'm like a huge fan of somebody. I certainly like some more than others, but no, sure. There's no sort of fanboyism in this old man.
Since you said moments, I'm going to ask you this, then I'll shut the hell up and I'll let you get out of here. Moments. So, what was your take on the moment when Max Holloway knocked out Justin Gaethje? Because that's the moment of the year right now. I mean, I don't think anything's going to touch that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it was sort of jaw-dropping, just because it's UFC 300. It's it's this. I always thought the BMF belt was a stupid gimmick, but it's this BMF belt, so you got that sort of pressure of, okay, let's make it something.
Yeah.
And he was just so handily winning the fight, and he just did not have to. Like, I thought he was going to get hurt in that fight, and he did not have to put himself in harm's way like that. And to KO the guy was just, that was a crazy moment. That's one of those memorable moments that'll last for years. So impressed the hell out of me.
Yeah. Because I took Gaethje to win the fight. I really, it was no disrespect to Max. Max is a true warrior. He's been in this game for so long. He's only like 32 years old or something, or 33 now. And he's been in this game, it seems like forever. But he was always a 145er. And then he did the 155 once, didn't come out his way. I didn't think we would ever see him there again. And then he just came in here and put it on a butt whooping to Justin Gaethje the whole fight. And then to just go, right here, right now, let's go, and then get the
that was it was just a wild moment. Good for him.
Great moment.
That was great.
Well, listen, I'll definitely reach out to you again. Maybe after this finally gets settled, and then we'll see where we go with this. But I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us and drop some knowledge on us that we were all interested in finding out about. Is there anything else you want to shout out, or links or websites that you want to drop before you go?
No, I think you covered a lot. Thanks so much, Chris. Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, and also one other thing, I'm cutting you a break too, because whenever I have fighters and coaches on my show, the first time on my show, I make them sing, but you're not a
Oh.
fighter. You're not a coach. I'm not even going to ask you to do it.
You and your audience don't need to hear that, so you've done them a favor as well. Thanks.
Oh, I've had some funny ones and I've had some horrible ones, but my followers like it because like I did it to Curtis Blades the first time he was on my show, and Curtis came on and did it, and Courtney Casey, and I've interviewed 300-400 fighters, and they just come on and do it, and sometimes they just sing happy birthday. I've had guys come on and do beatboxing and rapping. It's a whole lot of fun, but since you don't fall into the fighter category or the coach category, I feel I don't have to ask you to sing.
Good man, Chris.
Well, listen, thank you so much, guys. That's Erik Magraken, combat sports attorney. You can follow him on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. He's everywhere. And, if you have questions, you heard him. If you have questions about head injuries or anything like that, reach out to him, and he'll answer your questions for free. He won't charge you for any of that advice. So I hope you guys got some good information about the lawsuit. I'll be back in an hour with James Smiley. Until then, I am Christopher James. And guess what, kids? You've been Cage Side. We'll see you in an hour.